The M4 carbine felt wrong in her hands, too light, too aggressive, designed for killing when everything in Specialist Paisley Rivera's training had been about saving lives. But the enemy fighters pouring through the compound breach didn't care about her caduceus medical insignia or the Red Cross on her aid bag. They cared about killing every American in the Firebase, and Rivera was the only thing standing between 30 wounded Rangers and the enemy assault that was about to overrun their position. She'd treated gunshot wounds for 11 months in Afghanistan without ever firing her weapon in anger. That was about to change. The first insurgent through the breach saw a small female in medical gear, fumbling with a rifle, and probably thought she'd be an easy kill. He raised his AK-47, confident. Rivera raised her M4 faster, muscle memory from basic training taking over, and put 3 rounds center mass before her conscious mind caught up with what her body was doing. The insurgent dropped. Then his friends came through the breach, and Rivera stopped being a medic and became the last line of defense for 30 men who couldn't defend themselves. What happened in the next 13 minutes would change how the Army viewed combat medics, would earn Rivera decorations she'd never feel comfortable wearing, and would prove that sometimes the person least expected to fight becomes the warrior who refuses to let anyone die on their watch. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because you're about to witness the moment a nurse with an M4 held off an enemy assault that should have killed everyone in that aid station. Firebase Sentinel sat in the Kunar province of Afghanistan, a reinforced position on a ridgeline that overlooked a valley used by enemy forces to move weapons and fighters. 60 Rangers, 1 platoon of infantry, rotating through a deployment that had been described as moderate contact, but felt a lot more intense than the word moderate suggested. Specialist Paisley Rivera, 24 years old, Army medic with 11 months in country, had treated everything from minor shrapnel wounds to catastrophic IED injuries during her deployment. She was good at her job, calm under pressure, technically skilled, trusted by the Rangers who knew that if they went down, Rivera would get to them regardless of the fire coming in. What those Rangers didn't know, what Rivera herself barely remembered most days, was that before medical school had been her plan, before nursing and combat medicine had become her calling, she'd grown up in rural Montana, with a father who believed everyone should know how to shoot. Hunting, target practice, 3-gun competitions at the local range where she'd competed against adults, and usually won. She'd enlisted because medical school was expensive, and the Army would pay for it, had scored expert on her basic training rifle qualification without really trying, and then had promptly focused all her attention on medicine. The rifle had been for qualification, for the minimum standard expected of every soldier. Medicine was what mattered, what she'd deployed to do, what consumed every training hour and every combat engagement. Her M4 carbine was something she carried because regulations required it, cleaned because inspections demanded it, and never thought about because medics weren't supposed to need weapons. That assumption lasted until 8:47 hours on a Tuesday morning when everything went to hell simultaneously. The Firebase had been taking sporadic sniper fire for 2 hours. Harassing fire, nothing serious, the kind of thing that happened most days in Kunar province. Then the mortars started. Not the usual random rounds, but accurate sustained fire that suggested someone had pre-registered coordinates and was walking explosions across the Firebase with methodical precision. Rivera was in the aid station, a reinforced bunker that served as the medical treatment facility for Firebase Sentinel. With her were 30 wounded Rangers from a patrol that had hit an IED the previous night. Broken bones, concussions, shrapnel wounds, nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough injuries that they couldn't fight effectively. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole, the senior medic, was treating the worst casualties. Rivera was managing the walking wounded, monitoring vitals, distributing pain medication. The mortars found the aid station on their 3rd salvo. The round didn't penetrate, the bunker was designed to withstand indirect fire, but the explosion close enough that dust rained from the ceiling and several of the wounded Rangers cried out from the concussion. Then, the mortars shifted to the perimeter defenses, and through the narrow firing ports, Rivera could see the Firebase's defensive positions being systematically hammered. Staff Sergeant Cole looked at her with the kind of expression that medics got when they realized a bad situation was about to get worse. "They're softening us up for an assault. Get the wounded ready to move if we need to evac." Rivera started organizing, prioritizing patients by mobility, preparing trauma supplies for rapid transport, working through the checklist that training had drilled into her. Professional, focused, doing what medics did when combat escalated. Then, the Firebase's defensive perimeter exploded. Not metaphorically. Literally exploded as demolition charges blew gaps in the wire and sandbag walls. Through the gaps came enemy fighters, dozens of them, armed with AK-47s and PKM machine guns, moving in coordinated assault teams that suggested professional military training. The Firebase's defenders engaged immediately, Rangers firing from defensive positions, machine guns opening up, the disciplined fire of American infantry, trying to stop an assault that had numerical superiority and had achieved tactical surprise. But the mortars had done their job. Several defensive positions were damaged, communications were disrupted, and the enemy was inside the perimeter before a coordinated defense could be organized. Staff Sergeant Cole grabbed Rivera's arm. "I need to get to the command bunker. They're calling for medics. You stay here with the wounded. Lock it down. Don't open for anyone unless they give the proper challenge code." "Sergeant? That's an order, Rivera. These men can't defend themselves. You keep them alive until we can organize a counterattack." Cole grabbed his aid bag and ran toward the door, heading into chaos that was visible through the firing ports. Rangers fighting at close range, explosions, smoke, the kind of combat that looked like every training scenario they'd warned you about. Rivera locked the aid station door behind him and returned to her patients. 30 wounded Rangers. None of them combat effective, all of them dependent on the aid station remaining secure. She checked her M4, loaded, safety on, ready if needed, but probably wouldn't be needed because the Rangers outside would stop the assault before it reached the medical bunker. That optimism lasted about 90 seconds. The Firebase defenders were putting up fierce resistance, but the enemy assault was overwhelming. Too many fighters moving too fast through multiple breaches. Rivera watched through the firing port as American positions were overrun, as Rangers fell back toward the center of the Firebase, as the defensive perimeter collapsed inward. One of the wounded Rangers, Private First Class Tommy Garcia with a leg wound that had him on crutches, hobbled over to the firing port and looked out. "Oh shit, they're coming this way." Rivera looked. He was right. A group of enemy fighters, at least a dozen, had broken away from the main assault and were moving toward the aid station. They knew it was there, knew it was full of wounded, saw it as an easy target to eliminate before continuing their assault. The aid station had one entrance, a reinforced door that could be locked from inside but wouldn't stop sustained fire or explosives. It had 4 firing ports, narrow slits designed for observation and emergency defense, and it had Specialist Rivera, 30 wounded Rangers, and about 90 seconds before enemy fighters reached the door. Rivera made a decision that felt insane even as she was making it. She grabbed her M4, moved to the firing port with the best angle on the approaching fighters, flipped the safety off, and aimed at the lead enemy combatant. Her father's voice in her head: "Breathe, front sight focus, squeeze don't pull, follow through." She fired a 3-round burst. The lead fighter dropped. The others scattered, seeking cover, confused about where the fire was coming from. Rivera tracked the next target, fired again, missed high, corrected, fired again. Second fighter down. "Holy shit," Garcia said behind her. "Doc, you can shoot?" Rivera didn't answer, was too busy acquiring the next target, compensating for her elevated position, remembering competition fundamentals that she hadn't used in years. Third fighter down. The enemy realized they were taking fire from the aid station and began returning fire. Rounds impacted around the firing port, sending fragments of concrete into the bunker. Rivera ducked back, checked her magazine, 27 rounds remaining, and moved to a different firing port. The enemy fighters were advancing more cautiously now, using cover, moving in bounds, demonstrating the kind of tactical discipline that marked them as professional soldiers. They were maybe 30 meters from the aid station, close enough that Rivera could see faces, could see equipment details, could see the determination of men who thought they were about to capture or kill a bunker full of wounded Americans. Rivera aimed through the new firing port and engaged, controlled bursts, aiming for center mass, trying to remember everything from basic training and everything from those Montana ranges. Fourth target down, fifth target, wounded, crawling for cover, sixth target acquiring her position, raising his rifle. Rivera shot him before he could fire. Behind her, the wounded Rangers were reacting. Garcia had found a rifle, someone's M4 left in the aid station, and was checking it. Another Ranger, Specialist James Kingston with a broken arm, was organizing ammunition distribution with his good hand. Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes, concussed and shouldn't be moving, was stacking medical supplies to create better firing positions. "Doc, we've got maybe 15 mags between all of us," Kingston reported. "Most of the guys can't hold rifles with their injuries, but the ones who can are ready." Rivera changed magazines, her empty one hitting the floor. "Anyone who can shoot, take a firing port. Controlled bursts, don't waste ammo. We're holding this position until reinforcements arrive." "Reinforcements?" Garcia said. "Doc, the whole firebase is under attack. We might be the reinforcements." He wasn't wrong. Through the firing ports, Rivera could see the firebase's interior. Smoke, explosions, American positions fighting desperately. No organized counterattack visible. The aid station was isolated, surrounded by enemy fighters who were regrouping for their next assault. "Then we hold anyway," Rivera said. "Nobody's killing my patients, not today." The enemy came again, 6 fighters making a coordinated rush toward the aid station door. Rivera engaged from her firing port. Garcia fired from another, someone else, maybe Hayes despite his concussion, fired from a third. The attackers ran into a wall of accurate fire from unexpected positions. 2 went down immediately. The others dove for cover, their assault broken before it could develop momentum. But they'd gotten closer, 20 meters now, and Rivera could see more enemy fighters moving to reinforce them. This wasn't a dozen anymore. It was 20, maybe 25, all focused on taking the aid station that should have been an easy target. "Reloading," Rivera called out, dropping her second magazine, inserting her third. She had 4 magazines total, 120 rounds, and she'd already used 60. The math was simple and not encouraging. An enemy fighter popped up from cover, threw something toward the aid station. Grenade. It hit the exterior wall and bounced back toward the enemy position, detonating among their own fighters. Apparently they hadn't expected the walls to be that thick or the angle to be that unfavorable. 2 more enemies went down from their own grenade, screaming, wounded but not dead. Rivera used the confusion to engage 3 more targets. She was getting into a rhythm now, muscle memory taking over, training and instinct merging. Aim, fire, assess, shift, target down, next target. Controlled pairs, 2 quick shots, both center mass. The rifle that had felt wrong in her hands now felt natural, an extension of her will, a tool for protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. "Doc, we've got movement on the left side," Kingston yelled. Rivera shifted to that firing port, saw 4 fighters trying to flank around to a position where they'd have better angles on the aid station. She engaged, dropping the lead fighter with a headshot when he exposed himself to check the route. The second fighter stepped into the same position. Rivera punished the mistake with 2 rounds that sent him sprawling. The remaining 2 reconsidered their approach and fell back. Garcia was firing from his position, keeping suppressive fire on the main enemy group. A fighter tried to sprint between cover positions. Garcia tracked him, led him perfectly, and dropped him mid-stride. "Got him." "Good shooting, Garcia. Keep it up." Then, the Firebase's .50 caliber machine gun opened up from somewhere. Maybe the command bunker, maybe a surviving defensive position. The heavy rounds tore through the area where enemy fighters were concentrated, creating massive casualties, breaking their assault momentum. One fighter was hit by the .50 caliber and simply came apart, the massive rounds doing catastrophic damage. The enemy fighters nearest the aid station fell back, seeking better cover, their attack faltering. But Rivera saw what came next before anyone else did. 3 enemy fighters were setting up a PKM machine gun behind a destroyed vehicle, angling it toward the aid station's firing ports. If they got that weapon operational, they could suppress all 4 ports simultaneously, preventing Rivera and her wounded Rangers from defending effectively. Then, the assault would succeed. "PKM team at our 2 o'clock, behind the burned truck," Rivera announced. She shifted to the firing port with the best angle, but the machine gun team was well positioned, mostly behind cover, only small portions of their bodies exposed. Most shooters would have waited for better shots. Rivera didn't have time to wait. She aimed at the PKM itself, at the feed tray, where the ammunition belt loaded into the weapon. Put 3 rounds into the mechanism, hoping to damage it enough to make it inoperable. Then, she shifted her aim to the gunner's hands, visible where he was trying to load the weapon. 2 shots. The gunner jerked back, wounded. The assistant gunner moved to take over. Rivera shot him in the shoulder before he could get the weapon operational. The third member of the team tried to drag the PKM to a different position. Rivera put 2 rounds into his legs, dropping him. 3 fighters neutralized, PKM disabled, threat eliminated. But she'd used 15 rounds doing it, and her third magazine was running dangerously low. "Doc, they're pulling back," Garcia called out from his firing port. Rivera looked. He was right. The enemy assault on the aid station was breaking. Too many casualties, too much resistance from a position they'd expected to be easy. Too much effective fire from defenders they'd underestimated. The fighters were withdrawing to better positions, regrouping, reassessing. It gave Rivera 30 seconds to breathe, to check ammunition status, 1 magazine remaining, maybe 40 rounds between all the shooters. To assess her wounded, 3 Rangers had been hit by concrete fragments from near-miss rounds, minor injuries still in the fight. To realize that her hands were shaking now that the immediate action had paused. Her 4th magazine went into her rifle. Last one. 30 rounds between her and running completely dry. She looked at Garcia, at Kingston, at Hayes, at the other wounded Rangers who'd found weapons and were preparing to defend themselves, despite injuries that should have kept them down. "We're not done yet," Rivera said. "They'll come again. We hold. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Garcia replied, and several others echoed it. Ma'am. They were calling a specialist ma'am, like she was an officer, like she was in command, like she was the person they were looking to for leadership. Rivera had never commanded anyone, had never wanted to command anyone, had joined the army to be a medic, not a leader. But right now, these Rangers needed someone to tell them they could hold, that reinforcements would come, that they weren't going to die in this aid station. So that's what she did. "Ammo check," Rivera called out. The responses weren't encouraging. Garcia was on his last magazine. Kingston had half a magazine. Hayes had emptied his rifle and couldn't reload with his concussion, making fine motor skills difficult. They had held off 2 major assaults, but if the enemy reorganized and came with everything they had, the math said the aid station would fall. Rivera's radio crackled, first transmission she'd received since the attack started. "Aid station, this is Sentinel 6. Status?" She grabbed the handset. "Sentinel 6, aid station. We're under direct assault. Approximately 20 enemy fighters concentrated on our position. We've held so far, but we're low on ammunition, and I have 30 wounded who can't be moved. We need immediate support." There was a pause. When the voice came back, it was the Firebase commander, Captain Bradley Mitchell, and he sounded shocked. "Aid station, say again. You held off an assault. Who's defending that position?" "Sir, this is Specialist Rivera. Staff Sergeant Cole went to the command bunker. I'm here with the wounded. Some of them can shoot. We've been engaging enemy fighters trying to breach our position." Another pause. Longer. "Rivera, you're a medic." "Yes, sir. I'm also the only one here who isn't wounded, and I'm not letting anyone kill my patients." "Understood. Hold your position. QRF is moving to your location now. 2 minutes out. Can you hold for 2 minutes?" Rivera looked at her last magazine, looked at the enemy fighters visible through the firing ports, regrouping, preparing for another assault, looked at the wounded Rangers behind her who were depending on her to keep them alive. "Yes, sir. We can hold." She didn't know if that was true, but she wasn't going to tell the Firebase commander that the aid station might fall before reinforcements arrived. Would hold as long as possible, use every round, and if it came down to it, use the rifle as a club. Nobody was getting through that door while she was alive to stop them. The enemy came again. 8 fighters this time, moving fast, suppressive fire against the firing ports, trying to overwhelm the defense through speed and aggression. Rivera aimed, fired, dropped the lead fighter, shifted, fired, dropped the second. Her last magazine was depleting rapidly. 20 rounds, 15, 10. Garcia was firing controlled bursts from his position. Kingston had found someone's pistol and was firing through his firing port despite only having one good arm. The wounded Rangers who couldn't shoot were loading magazines, passing ammunition, doing anything they could to support the defense. An enemy fighter made it to within 10 meters of the door, carrying what looked like an explosive charge. Rivera tracked him, fired 3 rounds, all hits, center mass. He went down, the explosive package falling from dead hands. 5 rounds left in her magazine. 4, 3. Then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world. American voices shouting tactical commands, automatic weapons fire from new positions, the QRF arriving and engaging the enemy fighters from behind. The assault on the aid station collapsed as enemy fighters found themselves caught between Rivera's defense and the reinforcements' attack. The QRF's firepower was overwhelming. M4s, M249 machine guns, precision fire that cut through the enemy positions with devastating effectiveness. Enemy fighters who'd been focused on taking the aid station now found themselves fighting for their lives against fresh American troops who weren't wounded, weren't low on ammunition, and were very angry about the assault on their firebase. The firefight lasted another 90 seconds, then ended abruptly as surviving enemy fighters broke contact and fled. The silence that followed was shocking after 13 minutes of continuous combat. The aid station door opened. First Lieutenant Daniel Cross entered, weapon ready, clearing the bunker professionally. He stopped when he saw Rivera standing there, holding an empty rifle, surrounded by wounded Rangers and scattered brass casings. The floor was littered with magazines, medical supplies that had been used as barricades, and the evidence of a desperate defense that had somehow succeeded. "Specialist Rivera?" "Yes, sir." "Are you injured?" Rivera looked down at herself. Blood on her uniform, none of it hers, all from patients she'd treated. Dust and debris from near-miss explosions, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "No, sir, I'm fine. My patients?" "Your patients are secure. We've retaken the firebase. Casualties were heavy, but could have been catastrophic if the aid station had fallen." Lieutenant Cross looked around the bunker, at the evidence of fierce defense, at the wounded Rangers who'd fought alongside their medic. "I'm told you held this position against sustained assault. Is that accurate?" "We held the position, sir. These Rangers fought hard." "These Rangers are wounded and shouldn't have been able to fight at all." Cross's expression was somewhere between impressed and confused. "I need to understand what happened here. Start from when the assault began." Rivera walked him through it, Staff Sergeant Cole leaving, the enemy fighters approaching, the decision to engage. The 13 minutes of defensive combat that had killed or wounded over a dozen enemy fighters and held a position that should have fallen in the first assault. When she finished, Lieutenant Cross was quiet for a moment. "Specialist, you're a medic. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Montana, sir. And basic training. And I guess adrenaline does things to people." "Montana and adrenaline don't explain holding off 25 enemy fighters with wounded men and limited ammunition. That was exceptional combat performance under impossible circumstances." He looked at the wounded Rangers. "Did she really do what she's describing?" Garcia spoke up, leaning on his crutches. "Sir, Doc Rivera shot at least 15 enemy fighters that I could see. Controlled fire, good target selection, kept her head while the rest of us were trying not to panic. She's the reason we're alive." Lieutenant Cross nodded slowly. "I'm putting you in for a commendation, Specialist. What you did today was extraordinary." "Sir, I just did my job. My job is keeping Rangers alive. Shooting people who were trying to kill my patients seemed like part of that job." "Your job is medical care, not infantry defense. What you did went far beyond duty requirements. You saved 30 lives through combat action while wounded men fought alongside you. That's valor, Specialist, whether you're comfortable with the label or not." The firebase spent the next few hours consolidating defenses, treating wounded, and assessing damage. The enemy assault had been sophisticated and nearly successful. They'd achieved surprise, breached multiple positions, and came close to overrunning the firebase completely. The decisive moment had been the .50 caliber machine gun disrupting their main assault, combined with the aid station's unexpected resistance, forcing them to commit forces to a position they'd thought would be easy to take. Staff Sergeant Cole returned to the aid station after the situation stabilized. He looked at Rivera, at the brass casings scattered around firing ports, at the empty magazines, at the wounded Rangers who were talking animatedly about Doc going full infantry mode. Rivera, report. She walked him through it again, clinically, focusing on facts rather than emotional content. Cole listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he said, "You engaged in sustained combat as a medic. That's not what medics do." "I kept my patients alive, Sergeant. That is what medics do. By shooting people. Medics are non-combatants under Geneva Conventions. We're supposed to be protected, not engaging enemy forces." Rivera felt anger rising, pushed it down, kept her voice professional. "Sergeant, those enemy fighters weren't respecting Geneva Conventions when they tried to breach this aid station. They were going to kill 30 wounded men who couldn't defend themselves. I had a rifle in training. I used both. Would you prefer I'd let them die?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then, "No. I'd prefer exactly what you did, which was protect your patients by any means available. I'm just processing the fact that my junior medic apparently has infantry skills I never knew about. Montana, Sergeant, and basic training that I apparently retained better than I thought." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then, "No. I'd prefer exactly what you did, which was protect your patients by any means available. I'm just processing the fact that my junior medic apparently has infantry skills I never knew about. Montana, Sergeant, and basic training that I apparently retained better than I thought. Montana doesn't teach sustained defensive combat against numerically superior forces. You did something remarkable today, Rivera. I'm proud of you. Also slightly terrified of you. But mostly proud. The after-action reports described the Firebase Sentinel assault as a near-catastrophic enemy success that was turned into a defensive victory through multiple factors, with particular emphasis on the aid station defense that prevented enemy forces from securing a key position and killing or capturing 30 wounded Americans. Specialist Paisley Rivera was awarded the Silver Star for valor in combat. The citation was carefully worded to emphasize defense of wounded personnel rather than aggressive combat action, acknowledging that medics engaging in sustained firefights created doctrinal complications while recognizing that exceptional circumstances required exceptional actions. Rivera never felt comfortable with the medal. She'd done what seemed necessary at the moment, had protected people who couldn't protect themselves, had used skills she'd barely remembered she possessed. The 13 minutes of combat had been terrifying and exhilarating, and something she never wanted to repeat. But within the Ranger community, the story spread. About the medic who held off an enemy assault with wounded men and limited ammunition. About the nurse who'd apparently been a competitive shooter in another life. About Doc Rivera, who would treat your wounds and then kill anyone who tried to finish you off. 3 months later, Firebase Sentinel was attacked again. This time, the enemy avoided the aid station entirely, having learned from previous experience that the medical bunker was defended by someone who shot back with unexpected effectiveness. The assault was repelled through coordinated defensive fire, but the message was clear. Enemy forces had adjusted their tactics specifically to avoid engaging Specialist Rivera. "They're scared of you, Doc," Garcia said after the engagement. "You're literally a medic they train their fighters to avoid." "That's insane," Rivera replied. "I'm a medic. I'm supposed to be treating people, not terrifying enemy forces." "Yeah, well, you terrified the ones who tried to kill us. I call that a win." Rivera's reputation grew beyond Firebase Sentinel. Other units heard about the medic who'd held off an assault for 13 minutes. Combat veterans who'd been in impossible situations and survived through determination and skill recognized something familiar in her story. She became a symbol of something important, that training mattered, that skills could save lives in unexpected ways, that sometimes the person least expected to fight became the warrior who changed everything. Captain Mitchell personally ensured that Rivera's actions were documented thoroughly. He'd been in command during the assault, had heard her calm voice over the radio reporting the situation, had known that the aid station was about to fall and 30 wounded Rangers were about to die. When the QRF reported that Rivera had held the position through sustained defensive fire, he'd initially thought there was a mistake, that someone else had been in the aid station, that a medic couldn't possibly have done what was being described. Then he'd interviewed the wounded Rangers. Heard Garcia describe watching Rivera engage 15 targets with controlled precision. Heard Kingston talk about how she'd organized their limited ammunition and positioned shooters at firing ports. Heard Hayes explain how she'd kept everyone calm and focused, despite being outnumbered and nearly out of ammunition. Mitchell had been an infantry officer for 12 years. He knew combat, knew what it took to hold a position under sustained assault, knew the difference between luck and skill. What Rivera had done wasn't luck. It was exceptional marksmanship combined with tactical awareness and absolute determination to protect her patients. Most soldiers would have hidden, Mitchell told her during the awards ceremony. Would have locked the door and hoped the enemy moved past. You didn't hide. You fought with everything you had and saved 30 lives. That's not just medical care. That's warrior spirit. Rivera still didn't know how to accept praise for killing people. Her entire professional identity was built around healing, around preserving life, around being the person who fixed what combat broke. The 13 minutes when she'd been a shooter instead of a healer felt like a departure from everything she believed about her role. But the Rangers she'd saved understood something important. They'd been helpless, wounded, unable to defend themselves. Rivera had defended them, had used skills she'd learned in Montana, had relied on training from basic, had discovered reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. She'd been exactly what they needed in the moment they needed it most. That was the real lesson of Firebase Sentinel. Not that medics should become infantry, not that medical personnel should prioritize shooting over healing, but that in extreme circumstances, when no other option existed, people could rise to challenges they'd never prepared for and succeed through determination and skill that had been developed for completely different purposes. Paisley Rivera completed her deployment, returned home, and eventually went to medical school as originally planned. The Army paid for it as promised. She specialized in trauma surgery, bringing combat experience that made her exceptionally effective in emergency situations. She saved hundreds of lives over her career, far more than the 30 she'd protected in that aid station. But Firebase Sentinel remained her defining moment, the 13 minutes when a nurse had become a warrior, when medical training and Montana shooting skills had merged into something unique, when one person had decided that protecting patients meant whatever was necessary, including fighting a battle she'd never trained for against enemies who'd expected an easy target. The Rangers remembered. PFC Garcia, Specialist Kingston, SFC Hayes, and 27 others who'd been in that aid station stayed in touch with Rivera for years. Every one of them credited her with saving their lives, not just through medical care, but through combat action that had prevented their deaths when they were most vulnerable. That was her legacy. The medic who fought, the healer who'd become a defender, the unexpected warrior who'd held the line when no one else could. Specialist Paisley Rivera, the nurse who proved that sometimes protecting lives meant taking lives, and that 13 minutes of combat could demonstrate that courage came in unexpected forms from unexpected people. The Rangers didn't know their nurse could fight. Then, she held a position for 13 minutes under fire and taught them that assumptions about people's capabilities were often wrong, that training from one context could save lives in another, and that sometimes the most important warrior in a battle was the one who never planned to fight, but refused to let anyone die on their watch. Montana and basic training. Medical knowledge and rifle skills, compassion and controlled aggression, all of it coming together when circumstances demanded someone be more than their job description, more than their training, more than anyone expected. Paisley Rivera was that person, The medic who fought like infantry when infantry couldn't fight. The healer who understood that sometimes healing required preventing harm through force. The nurse who saved lives by any means necessary, including 13 minutes of combat that proved you could wear a caduceus and carry an M4 and use both with equal skill when protecting people mattered more than protocol. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was what Firebase Sentinel remembered about the day their medic became their defender, and 30 wounded Rangers survived because someone decided protecting patients meant whatever was necessary, including picking up a rifle and holding the line when nobody else could. Every single time. For 13 minutes, that became legend in Ranger history. The nurse who could fight, the medic who held the line, the unexpected warrior who proved that sometimes salvation comes from the person least expected to fight, but most determined to protect. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.